Hello everybody, welcome to this curated conversation here at the Ogden Museum. My name is Richard McCabe. I'm the curator of photography at the Ogden, and I'm here with the great Ben Depp, a New Orleans-based photographer. And today we're going to be talking about Ben's practice, his photographic practice that relates to the wetlands and the Louisiana coastal erosion and environmental issues here in Louisiana. And this talk is in conjunction with the John Taylor exhibition here at the Ogden, The Guardian of the Wetlands, works by John Taylor. So welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Richard.
And Ben is a freelance photographer. He's been a freelance photographer since 2005. He's done work for National Geographic, Newsweek magazine, New York Times, Washington Post, and Der Spiegel. And he's represented locally by a gallery for fine photography here in New Orleans. So if you want to purchase any of Ben's beautiful prints, they're available locally at a gallery for fine photography. So Ben, I want to talk about this conversation is in relation to John Taylor's work. So I just wondered how John Taylor's art practice might have influenced you, or how you feel about what he's doing and your work.
Yeah, I love John Taylor's work, for one. He's just, he's been in the lower Ninth Ward his whole life and has been a witness to the changes in this landscape. And he's looking very deeply at this landscape and watching the trees die, watching the vegetation changes, seeing the saltwater intrusion coming in, and then also making beautiful work and doing so much environmental education. He does these weekly walks, all around the lower Ninth Ward.
Right. Have you ever been to one of those walks?
I haven't been on one of those walks. I've met him while he was on and talked to him.
Yeah, it sounds great. I gotta go because of this exhibition. I really want to meet him, and and I want to. Actually, I really want to buy one of these walking sticks from him.
Me too.
So, I just, the first thing we got to ask, there's such a beautiful image here. The first thing you see about Ben's work is he's obviously an aerial photographer, and I have to just ask you, what made you want to take to the air to make this work? That's so a unique perspective of what you're doing.
Yeah, so I was interested to work on this story of coastal erosion and wetland loss and kind of tell this story visually. And I was looking at what had already been done and didn't want to repeat the same work that had already been done. And then flying in and out of New Orleans on commercial flights, saw the swamps from above and was just kind of blown away by this landscape. And went and looked to see what aerial photographs had been made and thought that a lot more could be done. So that's what got me into aerial photography, was seeing this landscape from an airplane.
Right, and I remember in 2014 I saw the Edward Bertinsky exhibition across the street at the CAC that NOMA did, and his work was aerial photography too, and I think the name of the exhibition was Water. And I remember thinking at the time, man, this is an epiphany, this is such a unique perspective, and and that's about the time you started doing it. And I was just wondering, I think he used mainly drones to make those photographs, because I don't see how else he could have done it, because some of them are in really tight spaces. Yeah. So why you use a paraglider, which is, you might want to explain what that is, but so I guess why risk your life and limb on a paraglider as opposed to just using a remote controlled drone to make these images with a camera mounted on it?
Yeah, so I love Bertinsky's work. And his work has been an inspiration for me, seeing that work at the CAC and the NOMA, and just his incredible, huge, beautiful prints that are so detailed. I think he uses a drone a lot, he uses an airplane, and then helicopters, and sometimes cranes.
Okay.
So he's kind of using everything that works. Mm-hmm. And when I was interested to take photos of South Louisiana, I was starting in 2013. And at that time, drones were still very expensive. And then I also would have needed a boat and would have needed to go out in a boat and look around and then fly the drone for a couple minutes and bring it back. And I learned about powered paragliding from another photographer, George Steinmetz, who shoots a lot for National Geographic. And so thought that maybe I could go out and use a powered paraglider to explore South Louisiana. And so that's what got me into using a powered paraglider to fly around and see what was out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting, and I mean, the other thing, I mean, I think that the perspective is just so unique, and what I think is interesting about your work is it blends art and science. It's also nature photography, but what I think is really interesting about it too is in landscape, there's an element of abstraction within it, which I think is just so cool. And since you've become, I guess maybe talk about that, or do you feel the same way about it?
Yeah.
I mean, is that something that resonates with people when they look at your work?
Yeah, when I first started making this work, I was kind of most interested in the very straightforward pictures that kind of explained the process of coastal erosion and kind of told this story visually in a new way. But then being out there, I just would see things and, just see really interesting, surreal scenes in the swamp, and started just going out and photographing and just going out and exploring and seeing these things and photographing them, and feel like that, a lot of them are abstracted a bit, and I think that pulls people in and holds people's attention longer and raises questions more than it provides answers.
Right, which is always great. It becomes this two-way conversation with the viewer about what's going on.
Yeah.
You have some prints on the table. Do you want to look at some? And I got to ask you, are there titles? What are the titles, or is it on these?
Yeah. So this is on the end of a barrier island in Plaquemines Parish, and this is the very tip of the island in the bottom left. And this is a big flock of white pelicans in the water at the end of the island. So if you look closely, you can see all the detail in the pelicans. And I have a series of these pictures. I was flying around maybe 1,000 feet above them, and this form in the water kept on changing shapes and just making all of these different shapes. And so I have a series of pictures of these group of pelicans just making all these strange shapes in the water.
That's great. It also kind of mimics the shoreline there, the tip of the flock there. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Just like I said, just the perspective is just so unique that it just adds another dimension to it. So you want to talk about some of these maybe on the table?
Yeah. So, I mean, one more thing about John Taylor, he's watching Bayou Bienvenue, and which has mostly died off because of saltwater intrusion from the Mr. Go Canal. And that canal is one of thousands and thousands of miles of canals in South Louisiana, and most of those canals were dug for the oil and gas industry for exploration. And this is one of those canals in an area that used to be all cypress forest and is now just open water, and there's people shrimping out there where it was cypress forest 80 or 100 years ago, and then you just have the built-up edges of the canal right here. So this is an image that I like. It's abstracted, and would take a moment to figure out. It's one of the images I really like.
Right. And is that the Wrigley's? Is that what you said?
No, this is down in Plaquemines.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
There's a little shrimp boat here going past.
Yeah, I watched one of your videos. You say you just see hundreds and hundreds of shrimp boats and oyster boats out there.
It's a lot of fishing industry out there.
And they're all right next to the oil industry, which is, they all live side by side. So, and then this one of the kind of the grassland, marshy.
Yeah, this is like dead grass marking the high tide line in Cocodrie, Louisiana, which is one of the areas with the fastest relative sea level rise, because the land is sinking so quickly and the sea is coming up. It's just, one of those moments where you have just perfect light, kind of sculpting that line. Well,
I wanted to ask you, I know it's all kind of horrible nightmare scenario, but what's happening on the Louisiana Coast, losing a football field every 30 minutes of land, but I'm doing this since 2014. Do you see any areas that are actually improving? Is there any positivity going on?
Yeah, I mean, along the Mississippi River in Plaquemines Parish, there's a couple places where the levees are broken and where the river is carrying enough fresh water and sediment out into the wetlands and building new little river deltas, like little deltas there. And so there are these like few places where the river is able to do its natural thing and, build new land. But it's, very small areas compared to how much we're losing. And so there's these small examples that provide some optimism. But then for me, I feel like we're still doing so many things wrong to exacerbate the environmental damage on the coast here. Whether that's, building new ports, digging more canals, building new plastics plants in the river, building new natural gas plants for Entergy in New Orleans East instead of building wind farms. We're still doing so many things wrong there's these few examples that we can be optimistic about, but we need to make a lot of dramatic changes.
So what is this one called here, this image here? This is beautiful, the blues and the water.
This is a blue-green algae bloom.
Okay.
And the algae is being pushed up into this little channel here. And when you get really high densities of this cyanobacteria algae, you can get these blue colors. And then as it dies, it's making those brown lines in there. So you're getting all these different colors from one type of algae and its different stages of life.
Wow. And what is this one titled here?
This is Montague. Okay, yeah.
Well, another relationship I see between your work and John Taylor's, and I don't know if this is a stretch or not, well, John carves these beautiful walking sticks, canes, and you actually built a boat, which I'm so interested in. I'd love to see the boat for one at some point, but I'm just so interested in that. You're a classic boat builder, so you built a boat so you could, I'll let you explain it, but so maybe you could reach some of these places you couldn't on the paraglider?
Yeah, so I'm flying a powered paraglider and often photographing very early in the morning or late afternoon when the sun is low on the horizon and creating more texture on the landscape and shadows on the landscape. And so I need to be kind of close to the places where I photograph, and so I can't fly really far early in the morning to be there in time. And so I'm using a boat. I started using an old wooden sailboat to sail out to some of these places, and then I would fly and photograph and then camp and then fly the next morning, that kind of thing.
Wow.
And then that boat was wearing out, and so I built a new wooden sailboat that I finished last year, and it's a 19-foot wooden sailboat that you can row and sail. And that was mostly inspired by Walter Anderson. And, I thought, if I could use a little wooden sailboat to row and sail around and, reduce my fuel consumption a little bit. And, but it's been an amazing vehicle because you just move so slowly. And so, it will take half a day or a full day to get somewhere. And you're just moving slowly on the wind and the tide. And just for me, it really slows me down and helps me to see much more clearly and kind of be present in that landscape. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I saw you talked about your work as a kind of a memorial to this landscape, kind of capturing it before it disappears. And I really love that idea of that.
Yeah, and I think John Taylor is doing that here. He's taking these pieces of old cypress, from trees that have died during his lifetime, that he's watched die essentially, and he's, carving them and making walking sticks. And there's something really beautiful about that, kind of taking the remains of what's left and making something usable. And I don't know, there's kind of some interesting symbolism with the walking stick too.
Right.
Surviving the future, maybe. I don't know, I won't speak for him, but for me it's interesting.
Yeah. I guess, not everybody can get on a paraglider and fly around or recommend that. And I guess you got to be really careful about when you fly, and you got to be watching the weather, obviously. Do you want to? So there's probably not many days you can go up, right? So you have to really plan this out and in advance, like.
I mean, I've gotten really good at watching the weather, and I've learned a lot about the weather during this project. And there's a lot of days when I go out and the wind is just a few miles an hour too fast, and I just hang out all day long. And then, or hang out for a couple days and wait for our window to fly, and it doesn't happen, and I just go home. And that happens almost as much as I have kind of successful trips.
That's good. And how is this an ongoing project? I mean, how much longer do you feel? Are you just going to keep doing this until?
I'm going to keep doing this for a while. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just finishing a book right now, which I'm excited about, which should be available next year, hopefully. And so that's been a bit of a sort of a marker in this project, but I still plan to continue exploring that here.
Oh, great. And do you want to talk a little about the book?
Not yet.
Okay.
I'll talk about it soon.
Okay, I understand that. So the book will come out next year. We need to do a book signing here at the Ogden at some point. So that's really exciting. I'm so glad. Usually a book sometimes is a kind of a, no pun intended, a book into the project. But I'm glad you're going to keep exploring the.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start working out, more in Texas and some of the rest of the Gulf Coast. So just work outwards a little bit with this project.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe the last question I'll ask you is, what is your advice for us, an everyday American, everyday Louisianian? What can we do to help the wetlands? What in our lives can we do to maybe slow the erosion, or any suggestions of?
I wish John Taylor were here, because I feel like he would have the best advice on this subject.
Yeah.
I think the first step is to stop making this problem worse. I think we need to really cut down on our pollution and plastic pollution and energy use, and take dramatic steps there to prioritize future generations and the future. I was thinking about this yesterday, and essentially colonists have been on this landscape for 300 years, having a serious interest in this landscape for 300 years. And people lived here for thousands of years before we were here, and managed to keep this landscape pretty intact the whole time. And in 300 years, we've almost totally destroyed it. So I think looking at how those folks lived and how they made decisions and prioritized how they lived can provide an example for how we can stop destroying this landscape more. So.
That's great advice. And I want to thank you, Ben, for taking the time. And your work is absolutely gorgeous, and we love what you're doing. And I remember you showed me this work when you were just started. You came by. It's been 5 years ago or something, and it's just really grown. And I'm so glad that Joshua down at A Gallery picked you up. And I think that was it's kind of a risk, because he doesn't really show this kind of photography, and it's really worked out great for both of you guys. And I think that just the work speaks for itself. It's just so beautiful and unique, and it's such a pertinent subject right now, what we're dealing with. So it's very important work, and just like what John Taylor has been doing since a child in the lower ninth ward, you're carrying on that, into the future here in Louisiana, and we really love it, what you're doing, and how you're helping educate people through your art. So thanks a lot, Ben, and I appreciate everybody being here for this curated conversation. And once again, this is part of the Guardians for the Wetlands, the work of John Taylor here at the Ogden Museum. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Richard. Thanks.